Hello ladies and gentlemen, Tevaron here and welcome to the Aether Revolt set review. As always, a few disclaimers first. These are my opinions and I am bound to be wrong on some of them, probably a lot of them. But this is my first raw evaluation of the cards without having played with any of them. In this video, we will be going through the white cards with the other groups to follow shortly. But first, there are a couple of new mechanics in Aether Revolt that we should look at. First up is Revolt. This is a keyword on spells and permanents that gives additional effects if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. Spells check on resolution, and permanents check when they enter the battlefield. Next up is Improvise. Cards with this keyword let you pay for them by tapping artifacts you control. Tapping an artifact reduces the cost of the card by 1 generic mana. You cannot pay colored mana this way. Also, you have to use all regular mana abilities before you tap artifacts for Improvise, so even though it's very unlikely to ever come up, you can't tap an artifact for Improvise and then sacrifice it in some manner for mana to also help cast the spell. So, let's get on to the cards, shall we? First up, we have Aerial Modification. Is 4 generic and a white enchantment aura. Enchant creature or vehicle. As long as enchanted permanent is a vehicle, it's a creature in addition to its other types. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has flying. This is an interesting card. While it is obviously intended to animate vehicles, it is worth noting that you can also cast it on a creature just for the +2/+2 and flying. I can see this maybe seeing a bit of play with very large vehicles that are difficult to crew. The main problem is that it costs 5 mana, which is a lot. So you have to cast 2 cards, a vehicle and this, and likely spend all or nearly all of your mana doing so on 2 separate turns. That seems very slow and inefficient. Aeronaut Admiral. It is a 1 white, 3 generic, 3/1 creature with flying, and vehicles you control have flying. Okay, I think the Admiral has more potential to see play in Duels than in Standard. That being said, the vehicle-based decks already have better vehicle crewers than this. So unless you want to build a vehicle deck that doesn't play red, I don't expect it to see a ton of play. Aether Inspector. A white and 3 generic for a 2/3 with vigilance. When Aether Inspector enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. When Aether Inspector attacks, you may pay 2 energy. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. While this is a very interesting design, Aether Inspector has several things working against it. First, it's 4 mana, which is a lot in the type of aggressive decks that would generally want to play this. The second is the fact you have to attack to trigger the servo generation, so that kind of rules it out as being a controlling card. Third, you can only make 1 servo each time it attacks, no matter how much energy you have available. And last, white is very light on energy generators, and you'd need to play in conjunction with a color that's good at generating energy, which is going to handicap the color that is good at energy generation by being paired with white, and therefore handicap the energy shenanigans available in your Energy Matters deck. I'm just not really impressed with the Inspector overall. Next up, we have Airdrop Aeronauts. 2 white and 3 generic for a 4/3 flyer. It has Revolt. When Airdrop Aeronauts enters the battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, you gain 5 life. Now this is a card that I think may have a very different ranking in Duels as opposed to Paper Magic. In Paper you can play for Archangel Avacyn, not so in Duels. And while I hesitate to call this Avacyn's number 2 through 4, it does have similar stats at a similar cost, though without vigilance. And if you can reliably trigger Revolt, I think this card could very well find a home in mid-range or controlling decks that would value the life gain and reasonably beefy evasive body. Next we have Alley Evasion. A 1 white instant that lets you choose one of two abilities. Target creature you control gets +1/+2 until end of turn, or return target creature you control to its owner's hand. I'm not sure about this one. As pump effects go, it's a bit worse than Built to Last. However, it's also more versatile with the second mode. I'm not sure if that's enough to get an aggressive deck to play it, as it's already very rare that you see Built to Last in those decks, but the extra versatility of it may be enough to push it over the top. Audacious Infiltrator. A white and a generic for a 3/1 dwarf. Audacious Infiltrator can't be blocked by artifact creatures. Well, I don't see this guy getting a ton of play unless you need filler in a dwarf deck, or artifact creatures become a huge part of the meta. There are simply better options available. Bastion Enforcer. A white and 2 generic for a 3/2 dwarf. So, 1 more mana for 1 more toughness over the previous card. Dwarves are going to have to be pretty desperate to include this guy in their ranks, I think. Call for Unity. A 2 white, 3 generic enchantment with Revolt. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, put a Unity counter on Call for Unity. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Unity counter on Call for Unity. So 5 mana is a lot in most decks that would want this type of effect, and you still need to trigger Revolt before it actually does anything. That being said, this is Magic Duels and card numbers are limited, so I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that this could perhaps do an impression of Always Watching's number 3 through 4. And while it doesn't give your creatures vigilance, it does pump tokens. Caught in the Brights. A white and 2 generic, enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. When a vehicle you control attacks, exile enchanted creature. This is not the white removal we are looking for. Oh, Oblivion Ring, where art thou? Moving on. Conviction. A white and a generic enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+3. You can pay a white to return Conviction to its owner's hand. Well, in a vacuum, this card is pretty mediocre, but it is really good at triggering Revolt. I'm not sure it's good enough at it, but it is something to keep in mind. Countless Gears Renegade. A white and a generic for a 2/2 dwarf artificer with Revolt. When Countless Gears Renegade enters the battlefield, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. Well, this is a bit better than the last 2 dwarves we saw. However, it's going to be hard to trigger the Revolt on curve. You'd have to trade or suicide your 1-drop to do it. Otherwise, it's turn 3 and sack an Evolving Wilds first. I personally feel it's pretty bad, but I'd be happy to be proven wrong. Dawnfeather Eagle. A white and 4 generic for a 3/3 bird with flying. When Dawnfeather Eagle enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. Well, if this thing had flash, it'd be insane. Without it, at 5 mana, I really don't think it's good enough. Deadeye Harpooner. A white and 2 generic, 2/2 dwarf with Revolt. When Deadeye Harpooner enters the battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, destroy target tapped creature an opponent controls. Now, this is a dwarf that I can see being pretty good if you can trigger Revolt fairly reliably. Removal that is also a creature is generally pretty strong. It's all going to hinge on how often you can get it to actually work. Deft Dismissal. A white and 3 generic instant. Deft Dismissal deals 3 damage, divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 target attacking or blocking creatures. No thanks. If Duels had sideboards, this would be a good sideboard card versus weenie decks, but it doesn't. And this spell is way too situational to be main deckable. Exquisite Archangel. For 2 white and 5 generic, we get a 5/5 Flying Angel. If you would lose the game, instead exile Exquisite Archangel, and your life total becomes equal to your starting life total. First, I want to say that I really like this card. Regardless of its playability, it does something that is really cool. I do think this card is probably better in Duels than in Paper Magic due to card restrictions. That being said, your opponent can still just kill it and then kill you. I do still think that it could be a card worth playing, though it is fighting for that 7-drop slot with both Bruna and Emeria Shepherd, and you can only run so many 7-drops. Giriper Osprey. A white and 2 generic for a 2/2 bird with flying. I don't think 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer is going to cut it. Maybe if there turns out to be a mono white skies deck. Probably not, though. Solemn Recruit. 2 white and a generic for a 2/2 dwarf warrior with double strike. It has Revolt at the beginning of your instep. If a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Solemn Recruit. Now this is a good dwarf. Any of you guys remember Mirren Crusader? I sure do. This girl doesn't have protection from black and green like Mirren Crusader did, but it can get bigger as the game goes on. I think Solemn Recruit is excellent, and not just in a dwarf deck. Saram's Expertise. 2 white, 2 generic sorcery. Create 3 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its casting cost. This card is extremely good, which is a theme I think we'll see with the Expertise cycle. These cards are kind of the fixed version of Cascade. A single card that makes a bunch of tokens is great. Just look at history in the form of Spectral Procession and Lingering Souls. Plus, you get to cast another card for free. For free! Yeah, sign me up for this one. I'm definitely on board. Saram, Senior Edificer. 1 white and 1 generic for a 2/2 Dwarf Advisor. Whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. Wow. Another very good dwarf. A Grizzly Bear with upside. Cast my Copter, draw a card. Cast Nimbus Wings, draw a card, and on, over and over. As long as he survives, of course. Thopter Arrest. A white and 2 generic enchantment. When Thopter Arrest enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until Thopter Arrest leaves the battlefield. Now here's the removal we have been looking for. While it's not actually Oblivion Ring, which would have been nice to get, wizards, so it can't deal with planeswalkers, it is quite versatile removal in the 3-drop slot, which white was sorely lacking in Duels. After not getting any Stasis Snare or similar effect before, this is a very welcome card. And that is the end of the white cards that are coming to Magic Duels in Aether Revolt. What are my top picks from white? I'm glad you asked. Coming in at number 3, Saram, Senior Edificer. Number 2, Solemn Recruit. And number 1, Saram's Expertise. What were your favorites? What would you have liked to have gotten that we didn't get? Personally, I'm a bit sad that Aether Geode Miner didn't make the cut, but I'm overall pretty happy with what we got. Tune in next time when we will be looking at the blue cards of Aether Revolt. And until then, friends, be excellent to each other.